Welcome to Under the Dome, Town Meeting TV's series where we get to go under the Golden Dome in Montpelier through the folks who are working there. I have today the pleasure of speaking with Senator Phil Baruth. Welcome.
Good to be here, Megan.
Yeah. So you have spent 16 years, at least, in the Senate. Is that right?
Yes.
You are currently working back to your job as English professor at UVM, and you're a novelist.
Yeah.
And you are not retiring, but you have announced your retirement from politics. And you announced that in February of this year, so kind of early on.
Yeah.
Why? Why now, and why that timing?
Well, I think when people stay around too long, they don't hear the criticism, but the criticism is out there. Why not let younger people take over? And I get that. And also, if you're going to go, why wait until the end and surprise everybody, make everybody scramble around? So given
Around the filing deadline, or
right.
Yeah.
And also, in addition to being a senator, I'm currently the Senate President Pro Tem. So giving my senators more time to decide who will lead them after me, I thought was very important. So.
Do other folks do this also, where they're like, it's time for the next generation to have a turn?
Not as much as we should, I think.
Okay.
I mean, the truth is that as an incumbent in Vermont, it's relatively easy to get reelected.
Yep.
So people can stay almost as long as they want. Sometimes somebody does something that ticks off the voters and they're removed, or there's a wave election and they wind up getting moved out that way. So I think it's, in each person's mind, when have you done enough, and when is it time to turn over the keys to somebody else?
So you've spent, the Senate is a close-knit group of folks. There are about 30 of you, there are 30 of you. What are you going to miss most about serving with your colleagues, and what are you happiest to leave behind? Yeah,
so walking into that building, it's a museum. I think everybody knows that. It's absolutely the most gorgeous building in the state of Vermont. So walking in the morning when it's quiet and, coming up the steps, coming into the front hallway is always just a real thrill for me. You feel like you're walking amongst other people in history, and just a very special feeling that way. But then also, being able to do something about problems that you hear from in your daily life. People have this or that issue, and you can put a bill in and you can start a conversation, and theoretically, hopefully, you can get a bill signed and change that situation for the better. So, the lovely work environment and then the ability to do important work while you're there, that's the best. The worst, I would say, you have to vote yes or no. We don't have another option. In Illinois, for instance, you can vote present. But in Vermont, you vote yes or no if you're on the floor. And there are some issues that are just very, very hard to draw a line on. And you go back and forth in your mind for weeks and months, and then ultimately your name is called and you have to go on the record as though you're 100% behind that yes or that no. And that's hard.
Yes or no, what was something that was hard for you to say yes or no on, or to make that definitive choice?
Well, you remember, I think, there was a Supreme Court justice who was being brought forward for confirmation, Michael Drescher. And
that's recent.
That's recent.
Yeah.
It was this session. And, he had a hand in the Mosin-Madawi case and had been on the other side during the hearing for Mosin-Madawi, and I felt that Madawi had been treated horribly, and not accidentally, on purpose treated horribly. You remember the beginning of the Trump administration's...
This is the guy who was down in southern Vermont and he got picked up.
Yep. And they wanted to whisk him out of the country to El Salvador or Africa, who knows these days. And yet Michael Drescher came forward and was obviously a superior candidate, obviously someone who, in every other circumstance, I would have felt really, positive about him. But that one I agonized about, and I ultimately voted against him. And, I feel like in the age of Trump, it was a statement about what ICE was doing, what the DOJ was doing, what the Trump administration was doing, more than what Michael Drescher had done. But again, I was only allowed one vote, yes or no.
And do you get a chance to speak on the floor about your vote? So you
Sure.
spoke about that.
Yeah, and sometimes I think it's good to explain, and other times it's good just to bite the bullet and vote.
Well, that leads well into, you are a P/D or a D/P, depending on how you want to run
D/P.
it. D/P. So Democrat first with strong progressive support.
Yep.
And you have, you started out that way. I recall that you had progressive campaign leaders helping you along the way. Do you feel that over the 16 years you stayed aligned with those initial sensibilities and you've kept that P as strong as the D?
Well, I would say this. I was a Democrat first, and so I got elected first in the Senate as a Democrat. But I think there's a great deal of overlap between the agendas of the Progressive and the Democratic parties. It has always seemed to me that the differences are, if you're in Burlington, those differences are really, really visible, and people work hard to keep the difference there. Contested seats, arguments back and forth. But as you pull out statewide, it's very, very similar. And in fact, the Progressive caucus in the House and our progressives in the Senate generally vote the same ways, with a few exceptions. So I think, in that sense, I've been working in service of both parties. But I would also say that in the Senate, I work with the Republicans all the time. There were 13 Republicans, there were 17 Democrats, or 16 Dems, one progressive. And so, I'm not ignoring the Republicans. I'm trying my best as the leader of the Senate to get something that everybody can vote yes on. And a good example would be the education bill this year. Mm-hmm. We got rid of mandatory consolidation, and we kept some, controls on spending, and that was enough to bring in Democrats and Republicans in big numbers. I think 27-3 was the final vote on that. And I think that surprised everybody. People expected a bloodbath over that bill, and we wound up in broad agreement.
And you had to change your position to get behind that bill in a way. I mean, you had to, your position had to evolve on education because you were somebody that came out in support of Act 73 and consolidation and the formula, the foundation formula, caps on spending, correct?
Well, I would say partially correct.
Okay.
So when we did Act 73, the governor was the one who insisted that mandatory consolidation be a part of it. For me, the main thing was the foundation formula. In other words, allowing a weighted formula to give each district a certain amount of money, and then you have to live within that budget. You can spend it however you want, but that formula determines your spending level.
That's what we call the cap on spending.
Yeah, it's one of several kinds of caps on spending.
Yeah.
But with that said, since the governor originally said, I won't do a bill unless you do mandatory consolidation, House and Senate agreed on that 2 years ago, and we passed that bill. But it put off the question about how to consolidate, who consolidates, until this year. When we got into it this year, broad disagreement with mandatory consolidation, and so the House Speaker and I went to the governor each and said, we can't do this, we don't think it's going to be possible, and he ultimately agreed to move the bill forward without the mandatory consolidation. So yes, Act 73 envisioned mandatory consolidation, but my reason for supporting it then was it was the only way to get what I considered real spending curbs. And if you remember 2 years ago in the election, we lost 20% of the Senate and the House lost a proportionate
By we,
number.
meaning the Democrats.
The Democrats.
Yeah.
And that was over the property tax issue. So, anybody listening, we heard you, and we acted this session on that. So there are curbs in place, as well as an agreement with the governor to buy the property tax rate down.
Tell us a little bit about, so it sounds like you in a political role will hear voters when they go to the polls or when you're going door to door. What are some of the other ways in Montpelier that your opinions get shifted, or you learn things, and give us an example of something where you kind of like felt yourself moved a little bit politically?
Well, let me start with what doesn't work with me. I don't know about other people, but email has almost completely lost its effectiveness. And my reason for saying that is that there are so many programs out there that allow people to, with one click, send you an email. And so you get, 200 absolutely identical emails. And yes, you register that somewhere a machine helped people produce that. It's not that that doesn't touch me at all, but an individual letter from somebody or an individual email to me talking about their problem, that makes a big difference for me. Going door to door makes a big difference for me, and hearing what people who aren't following the day-to-day, what they really think is important. That's a big deal. And then the other thing I would say is that in Vermont, we have a lot of people who work in the nonprofit sector and do yeoman's work around the state for very little money, but they are experts in their subject area. And so I tend to listen a lot to people, who have a passion for the environment or have a passion for housing. And, they come with real data, real information, and they have an impact.
Talking about impact and hearing from constituents, you've been a strong advocate of gun control.
I call it gun safety myself.
Gun safety. And you drew some really sharp criticism from around the state and even some national folks that were coming in around the, what was that? The
assault weapons ban.
Assault weapons ban, yeah. What's that been like for you in that process?
Yeah.
Take us a little bit behind, your kind of what keeps you up at night, and and how does that affect your ability to advocate for legislation that you think is important to you or your constituents?
Yeah, I'll just give people a little broad history. So, in 2013, we, at the very end of, I think it was 2012. There was the Sandy Hook shooting, and I believe 21 children were killed by someone with an assault weapon. And that was just my radicalization moment. And so I put in a bill to take Vermont back to where the US had been during the 90s under the Clinton administration. If you remember, we passed an assault weapons ban under Clinton, and it was a big achievement. It was also one of the reasons why George Bush was successful getting back in, was that the National Republican Party weaponized that piece of legislation. Bill Clinton and the ATF are coming to take your guns away. Talk radio really put that out. And so that started what I think of as a very strange moment in American history, where the Republican Party's stated policy became every person in America should have as many guns as possible, with as few restrictions and as few safety precautions as we can get. And it has produced a country that is just awash in guns. Millions and millions and millions of guns, many of them these high-performing semi-automatic style weapons. So when I put in my ban on assault weapons in 2013, I just got incinerated, would be the word I would use. No one in the State House agreed to sign on to the bill. Nobody would support the bill. It was generally regarded as my death sentence that I had put it out. People were, having rallies on the State House lawn with little nooses and things like that. It was a very, very weird time for me.
Did you get personal threats?
Oh yeah, yeah, and although I didn't want to, I felt like I had to communicate that in some way to my family, that there are people out there who are mad at me, and we're going to have to keep the lights on at night. We're going to have to do this or that. So that was the low point, but a very weird thing happened between 2013 and let's say 2014, 15, and that was, you remember, there were just massacre after massacre after massacre. And every time there was a massacre, the TV crews would call me because I was the only one willing to do the gun safety side of the argument. And then they would call generally, 2 or 3 other gun rights people, and we would have it out in little sound bites on TV. But gradually, the argument shifted. More and more people got radicalized on the idea that we needed to stand up and demand gun safety. So if you go to the 2018 bill that the governor signed on the State House steps, that was kind of the 2013 to 2018, that 5-year period saw a huge shift. Republican governor came in and said, we don't need any new gun laws. And then we had the near shooting at Fairhaven. And he did a 180 and said, I will sign strong gun legislation. And so that's when my universal background checks bill stopped being held in committee and moved forward. We put about 3 or 4 other proposals around it, and that became the signature bill in 2018.
So what I'm hearing from you is a lot of energy and a lot of care around this.
Yep.
What do you do with that if you're retiring from politics? Because
Well,
my
I'm
guess
an
is we're
author.
not done. So how do you take that? Where do you take that energy?
Yeah, so in my other life, I'm an author, and so I'm at work on a book about this issue.
Okay.
And it will have everything that we've done on gun safety, all of the experiences that I've had, and including some that I don't think people bring to mind. So we passed a ban on paramilitary training camps, which I think people in Burlington or Brattleboro might say, what's the...
Well, we heard about it because
issue?
it was happening down in southern Vermont.
Right, Slate
yeah.
Ridge.
Yeah.
Slate Ridge was not the only one of these camps. There were 2 others that were sort of less developed. But if people have been paying attention out in the western states, Washington and Oregon, they have real problems out there with paramilitaries that the Republican politicians out there use as security. And I didn't want that happening in Vermont. So we passed that bill and the governor signed it. But I think that's one of the more forward-looking pieces of legislation on this issue that we've done, because like I say, if you look at what's happened over the last 20 years, the U.S. is just being flooded with guns and rhetoric around Second Amendment revolution. I thought it was prudent to legislate against people using big tracts of land to train other people to overthrow governments.
You mentioned a shift 2013 to 2018. There's
Yeah.
another sort of shift at that time that we refer to as the Me Too era.
Yeah.
And you were, if my research was right, chair of the Senate Sexual Harassment Panel.
Yep.
And there has been some folks called to task in the legislature in Montpelier for treatment of women. And of course, the Me Too movement really shifted the whole conversation around how women are treated in public spaces, private spaces, professional spaces, and what we accept. So tell us a little bit about how being part of that panel informed your thinking, and just how you reflect on that, being in Montpelier during
Yeah.
this time.
Yeah, so I was the chair of that panel, and while I was the chair, we rewrote all of our regulations around sexual harassment in the Senate. We formed a sexual harassment panel, which does its work today. And, not incidentally, we also created a much stronger internship program and page program. So the way it stood before was interns and pages in the State House. There was no accounting for them. There was no, real eye on them to protect them. And so with, along with the Me Too movement, we made things safer for pages, for interns, for anybody working in the State House. And I think that has held up. We also added a harassment panel. And so you can put you can file a complaint, not just around sexual harassment, but around harassment based on race, based on gender, et cetera.
It's a complicated place to be. I
Absolutely.
mean, sometimes you walk in there and you're like, am I in a high school cafeteria?
Right.
Or, all these different brain types, all these different ways of getting along and thinking.
Well, and if I could just mention one other thing, people wouldn't remember now, but we did suspend a senator, and I was what amounted to the prosecutor in that suspension. His name was Norm McAllister, and he had brought an intern into the State House and was, she was a very, very young girl, and he was accused of harassing her. He was also accused of harassing and assaulting women on his farm.
Yeah.
And so we suspended him ultimately from the Senate, and that was a bipartisan 2/3 majority that suspended him. Never been done in history, but it was a shot across the bow in the name of things like the Me Too movement. We can't have zero accountability because the voters elected you.
And what was the impact? What do you think now, looking back, what's the impact of that?
Well, so prior to that time, if you went to the Senate secretary or anybody involved with our rules, it was impossible to get someone out of the Senate because the voters had put them in. The voters could take them out, but they couldn't be removed during their term. We proved with the suspension that we could take someone's powers away for that kind of criminal activity, and I think that's all to the good. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. So if you know you can't be removed for any reason, there's no check.
Yeah. Shifting away from that, one of the, as the Senate pro tem, you're responsible for making sure, do you appoint, you do a collaborative process for appointing committee chairs?
Right, we have a committee on
Yeah.
committees.
Yeah, but you do decide what legislation hits the floor, is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, almost all of it goes forward,
Yeah.
but I do have the ability to hold things back, to slow them down, or not to move them at all. I've tried in my time as pro tem to be very, very sparing about how I use that power, but occasionally there's something where someone, committee chair, feels very strongly about something. They move it out of their committee, it's coming to the floor, and then I realize, having a closer look at the bill, that it's not something that the broader party can support. And so in that case, maybe it slows down, maybe it doesn't reach the floor at all.
Now, along with that, your counterpart in the House, Speaker Kerwinski, who's also retiring at the same time or stepping down from politics,
Yep.
You didn't always see eye to eye. There were things that you wanted to move forward that she was not moving forward. Tell us a little bit about that, and knowing what you know now, looking back, would you have changed anything or done anything differently?
Yeah, I mean, that's...
And did it affect your ability to see legislation through?
I mean, that's checks and balances, and that's what our government is built on. So, the Senate can't move something unilaterally. We have to get agreement from the House, and then the governor has to have his say. So, I tell people when I go do classes on the process, I tell people that the designers of our Constitution, on purpose, made it very hard to pass a law and very, very easy to kill a law or a bill. And the reason is, it should be very difficult to pass a law that binds all of your citizens. That's power that should not be just thrown around lightly. So, there were things that I wanted that couldn't get out of the House. So, for instance, the Burlington voters wanted a charter change to prevent guns in bars. With my work in gun safety, that became very important to me. But I could not move the Speaker, and I could not move the committee that had the bill. And and it is what it is.
Yeah.
But then
So that charter change is still not sitting there, which sort
Well,
of
it's-
compounds two things.
it's dead now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
when the inability for a local community to pass
Yes.
something without having it
Right.
approved by Montpelier.
Right.
And there's legislation around that to sort of upend that, right?
Yeah, perennially, but
Yeah.
it doesn't really go through usually because it's
Yeah.
such a system-wide change.
Yeah.
But just one other example, if you take the child care bill, that was something that the Senate was passionate about. The House had on their agenda paid family leave. And that was a big fight in 2023 between the two chambers. Both chambers had good intentions, you know. Paid family leave is something I believe in, but the moment was right for childcare. There had been a huge campaign building and, you know, procuring support, and we didn't have the money to do both. So we held out for just doing childcare. That ultimately carried the day, but I'm sure the House folks felt thwarted in the way I did over the Burlington Charter. Everybody's doing their best for their voters, and you don't always agree.
Another check is, of course, the ability for the governor to veto items. And I don't know the exact math on it, but this governor has
Yeah.
a record for vetoes, I think.
Oh, by far.
Yeah.
By far.
And as you mentioned earlier, you lost the ability to override those vetoes. He vetoed just recently the reference-based pricing, which was a bipartisan support.
Yeah.
So just talk a little bit about that. What's that like when you can't override the vetoes? And what's your experience been? Is that, again, a check and balance, or is something out of whack with what people want to get done?
Well, two things. Phil Scott has vetoed more bills than any governor in history by far. Almost, I think if you take out Howard Dean, Phil Scott has vetoed more than all the other vetoes put together. So
Howard had the record, and then, yeah.
So he's made it a much more common thing. Ultimately, I don't know how good or bad that's going to prove to be, but it won't be the end of it. If you have a Republican governor who vetoes that frequently, the next Democrat probably will do similar things
Yeah.
if there are bills they don't like. And it is a check, it's a necessary check, but take the reference-based pricing bill, S-190. That was a bipartisan bill to reduce hospital costs by creating ceilings for prices on certain drugs. And, it was a great surprise that right at the very end of the process, the governor vetoed that. And all I can say about it is that if you're worried about your property tax, I would say 70% of that problem is health care that we pay for all of our teachers and all of our employees in the school system. So the one single thing you could do magically to reduce property taxes is bring down healthcare costs. So when the governor vetoed that, he was actually vetoing our most powerful way to keep the property tax down going forward. I don't understand it myself, and the governor will have to defend that. He's running for re-election, but it was a surprise and a horrible surprise, I would say.
And is it your job in politics to try to get into understanding why?
Sure. So, take the bill we did to create a new system to aid in the homelessness situation statewide.
He had vetoed that previously.
Right.
Yeah.
And so Ginny Lyons, who, anybody out there, if you're thinking about whether you should vote again for your incumbents who have been there a long time, Ginny Lyons has been there a long time. She is the mainstay of what we do around healthcare. She's a phenomenal mind when it comes to healthcare. So I can't say enough about her in terms of the work she does. She's just an amazing public servant. But she also, in her committee, takes care of the homeless situation. And when her bill 2 years ago got vetoed, she really dug into why, talked to the administration, found out what they were, not down with, and produced a better bill, a stronger bill this time around, that was tailored in some ways to the governor's interests, and we're all better off for that bill passing.
Excuse me. Speaking of your colleagues, you get to be senator through Senate redistricting, right?
Did you say I got to be senator?
I mean, you have run for Senate when it was
in different districts.
one single 6-person district, and now these 3 separate districts. And just talk a little bit
Right.
about that.
Sure.
How did that come about, and how did that change how you campaign?
Yeah, the old Chittenden district was called the 6-pack
Yeah.
because we had 6 senators. People don't know this, but we were the only district in the nation that had that many senators. I think nationwide, 3, maybe 4 was the tops. So 6 was way out of line, but it remained that way for a long time for various reasons. Tim Ash, when he was Senate President Pro Tem, made it a priority to break it up into 2 3-senator districts. And it's just smaller, it's more intimate. You can get around your district much easier. So I had 16 towns originally. Very hard to get around to 16 different towns in a 2-year period when you're in the legislature working. But you know, when it came down to Chittenden Central, I had Burlington, Essex Junction, Winooski, you know, much more compact, and you're able to really have a dialogue at that point.
So you feel like it's a little easier to connect and talk to folks.
Absolutely.
I've heard the opposite from some of the other folks who are in the other your other districts that they're a little more spread out, or they're
You mean 3-member districts?
Yeah.
Well, they probably didn't go from 6 to 3.
Yeah.
So it might seem spread out to
Yeah.
them now, but compared to the entire county in Chittenden, where you have such population, yeah, it was tough.
We talked a little bit about this most recent education bill. You mentioned the housing, the homeless continuum of care plan, and the reference-based pricing in healthcare. But 16 years is a long time. And so what else really stands out to you that you're proud of being part of that made a difference in the lives of Vermonters? You know, I know that there was public pension stabilization, paid sick days, some other housing support measures that were put in, but just talk to us a little bit about.
Yeah, I would say another, what I regard as a big achievement under Democrats over the last few years. If you remember, there were 3 state colleges that were looking at bankruptcy. Jeb Spalding, about 5 or 6 years ago, suddenly came out and said, we're going to shutter these 3 institutions because we don't have the money from the state to keep them going. And so we sprang into action, the legislature. Some might say a little late, and I would go along with that. We should have been on it earlier. But we created a blue ribbon task force that came out with a plan to stabilize the state colleges and merge them into Vermont State University. So that has been accomplished now. We had a 5-year bridging plan where the state put in hundreds of millions of dollars.
Are we through the 5 years already?
Yep.
Wow.
In fact, this is our 6th year.
Wow.
And it's been successful. Their numbers are looking real good.
It wouldn't be a program, and 6 years is the right term if we didn't talk about COVID.
Right.
And your experience of what it was like to legislate during COVID. So give us your view, your perspective, your spec.
Well, I'll break it up this way. So Tim Ash was President Pro Tem during the first year of COVID. And, you know, he was faced with an unprecedented emergency, and he brought us online as a legislature. So we fully on Zoom, and we didn't miss a beat. That was great. That was groundbreaking. We pretty much evacuated the State House. Then Becca Balint was President Pro Tem for 2 years during the middle of COVID, and she was more or less in the State House by herself because our rules said that someone had to be there physically running the show on the floor. And so Becca Balint did the middle, and then when I came in as President Pro Tem in 2023, it was the wind down, which sounds like it would be easy, but for instance, we had a tsunami of federal money during COVID. So during Becca's 2 years as Pro Tem, there was money for everything, just, $1 billion or more dollars.
Where did all that money come from?
From the government. Yeah, we had a government that was responding to everybody equally at that point.
Yeah.
But then when that money stopped, we had to make decisions about what was going to stop being funded. And back to the State House, people were going back into the State House, but there was still social distancing required. So we had, some real fights over rooms, space, accommodations. All those things had to be sort of smoothed out. And so that was my first year, getting us back into full contact as a legislature.
Do you feel like everything's back to normal now?
Oh yeah, I mean there are some things that will be with us and should be. For instance, Zoom. We now have YouTube of every Senate session, every committee hearing. That was long overdue, and if you're a citizen at home, you can testify in committee just from your living room.
Did it change? I mean, did it change who you're hearing from, and did it change how you're governing?
Absolutely. So if you have to drive to Montpelier the way you used to, you either have to be able to take the day off, so you have to be independently wealthy, or have an employer that's sympathetic to you, or you have to have the money where that's not going to be an issue. And the way it is now, someone can be at their desk at work, they can be given a 11 o'clock witness testimony time, and then they can Zoom in, they can speak for 10 minutes, Zoom out, and they're still at their workplace.
Yeah.
So it's the way it should be, and technology has helped us out there.
We talk about the money. First of all, do you need some water, Jonathan?
Oh, I'm fine.
Okay. We talked about the money, and we have both a deeply partisan kind of tone to our
Nationally?
Yeah. Which I'm curious about how that affects. I'm curious how that affects what your experience of being in Montpelier, and then of course uncertainty around federal funding and how that adds stress to building the budget. That said, you all came out with a tripartisan supported budget this year, ended without too much extra time. So just talk a little bit about that. What is it like to live under this stress? I heard somebody refer to it as really feeling like they needed to protect Vermonters from the federal government.
Yes. And that's no joke. Donald Trump is, I'll just say it flatly, he is a sadist. He wakes up in the morning looking to make life harder for some people. He gets a certain thrill out of that. So he wants his cronies to do well, but he also, I think, enjoys cutting off money to blue states, cutting off money to populations that depend on it. And there's a psychology there that I don't want to delve too deep into, but I don't think we've ever had a president who has been that psychologically damaged. So for instance, FEMA, instead of operating equally around the country, FEMA has been pulled back into a sort of support role for the states, unless you happen to be a state that Donald Trump likes or needs in some way, then FEMA is going out, then your disaster declarations are getting approved. So we had disaster declarations turned down here, as have other blue states. I was looking at the most recent statistics. It's dramatic. Red states are getting this much in the way of disaster relief, and blue states
Can you give us an example of a disaster where we didn't get the money?
I'm thinking we had flooding the last couple of years. So we did get the 23-24 money, but 25 and 26 we had some events, flooding, and also I think we lost crops to frost and other things. We didn't get the kind of relief that we were expecting. The other thing that I would say is, if people remember, I want to say it was beginning of last year, maybe it was the beginning of this year, the Trump administration cut off SNAP benefits.
Yeah.
And they were reviewing them, but essentially they stopped sending the money. And either our SNAP beneficiaries were going to go hungry, or we were going to find $4 or $5 million to bridge until that money hopefully would come through, which we did. Mm-hmm. And then after a lag of a couple of months, that money came through. But the Trump administration made it very clear that this was only the first of many such situations where they were going to stop money. Think of our universities.
Yeah.
Similarly, grants stop going to the university, then they have their own fiscal problems, they need to lay people off, etc. It's whimsical, it's cruel, and it's done in the name of fiscal responsibility. But as everybody knows, Trump has layered on huge amounts of debt, trillions of debt, with his big, beautiful bill. So it's not about fiscal reality. It is about making certain people's lives harder.
And now, when the legislature responded to that crisis around the SNAP benefits,
Yeah.
that was done with general consensus?
Yes.
Or do you feel that they're, like, having an opinion like yours is accepted, and can you communicate with other folks in Vermont in the legislature?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that our Republicans in the legislature, I won't say every Republican in the state of Vermont, but the people that I deal with in Montpelier are intelligent, warm, compassionate people. They are Republicans. They're a little more fiscally responsible, perhaps, than Democrats or progressives.
Responsible or conservative? You said fiscally responsible.
That would be their way of
way
of framing it. But I would say they're generally speaking more worried about state spending than are Democrats and progressives, and they tend to, push for greater cuts in social services, which we don't tend to support. But I don't beef with our Republicans over whether you feed people or whether you house people. I mean, even the governor, when he vetoed our expansion of the homeless program, he put out an executive order covering, certain classes of homeless folks with disabilities and other things. So I just feel like, even though we have our disagreements, we have broad consensus in the state that we look out for one another.
What is it that didn't get done that you will still be advocating for, or that you'll be calling your senator or your House rep to say you want this to get through?
Yeah, so we talked about gun safety. I'll just mention some of the things that we got, because over the last 10 years, we've put in place all the basic infrastructure for a rational approach to guns. So we have waiting periods, we have safe storage, we have a ban on high-capacity magazines. We have lots of different protections now that we didn't have 10 years ago. What we don't have is a ban on assault weapons. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the massacres that have been committed over the last 15 years, they are by and large exclusively committed with high-capacity weapons. So that needs to be done at some point. There's a pessimistic part of me that fears it will take many, many, many more people dying before we get that legislation. But if people look back to 2013, when I originally put in the assault weapons bill, and you look at all of the legislation that's passed since then, and there were probably 15 different provisions that have passed since then, none of them prevent you from defending yourself or enjoying hunting or traditional uses of guns. What they prevent is someone having the easy ability to kill themselves or someone else in an unchecked manner.
It's another left turn, so to speak, but it wouldn't do well not to mention that you gave a great speech on the Senate floor in support of community media.
Yeah.
That I think we pulled and put into our archive, which periodically we will find items that the legislature has discussed. For example, Essex Junction merger happened, so we went from 252 towns to 251, or something. The numbers there should know that, but and pull those. So first, thank you for your support.
Sure.
Folks know that this resource that we have to talk to local legislators, to get information to folks, to pay attention to what's going on in the community, is supported by cable franchise fees, basically, the public right-of-way. And so the need to move forward and find another funding source. We will miss you as a champion in the legislature for that.
And one thing I would just say to people who are watching, if you see what the Trump administration and his cronies are doing to the media, it is no accident. They're buying up the major legacy stations, and then they're, making them fair and balanced, i.e., they're putting in conservative, very conservative, and in some cases fringe folks to direct the news operations there, with a direct hotline to Donald Trump so that he doesn't get negative coverage. How do you respond to that as a state? Vermont can't do a lot, but what we can do is make sure that our people here have a direct source in their community that they can trust. And so, the money that we put into it, I think it was 1.8 million this year. It'll go up to 2 million next year. Drop in the bucket for what it does in terms of
across the state,
keeping people informed and making sure that they can tell the difference between disinformation and information.
Yeah, it's not an accident that Stephen Colbert, he did his last show and then he went back to Monroe, Michigan,
and did
took over
community
public
media.
access. And you're kind of like, tongue in cheek, it's a little funny, it's silly, but it actually is sending an interesting message about anybody can take over the airwaves, and that's an important piece, because you never know whose voice is the loudest, and the loudest voice isn't always the rightest.
Right. And he's a great example of somebody who got whacked by the oligarchy, basically.
Yeah. If you were starting out today and you were to look back at your younger self, 2010, that's 16 years ago, and then, maybe even before that, where you were starting to get involved in public service, what advice would you want to give to yourself?
Well, I remember when I ran in 2010, I had the slogan that was, because you got 6 votes in the Chittenden district, and I had a sticker made up that went on the front of the Free Press with my picture, and it said, you get 6 votes, use 1 to change Montpelier. And, running as change, and so you get in there and you find out it's not that easy to change things. And without being an apologist for the status quo, I don't want to do that, but I will say again that the process is designed to be slow and ponderous so that people can't run in, change everything radically, and disadvantage voters or oppress voters that way. So it's hard, and those checks and balances are very important. So my first year, when I realized it was hard, I decided to spend that year mostly listening on the floor, watching what was happening on the floor. If I had questions, I went to John Bloomer, who's the Senate Secretary. He made everything very transparent for me, and so I just learned a lot. But one of the things I learned is that change is slow, but that's not necessarily always the worst thing.
Where doesn't it work?
Where doesn't what work?
Where does that slow approach to change, where is that not working?
Oh, well, I mean, for instance, in our housing, so I think we had, many years following Act 250 where there was a kind of blind allegiance to Act 250 in the same way that I feel a blind allegiance to the billboard law, right? I feel like it's done absolutely wonderful things for the state, and I support it 100%.
Wait, does anybody try to overturn the billboard law?
Well, I have heard it in the
okay.
State House, but let's stay
As a
with
revenue generator? Sorry, yeah, go ahead, keep going.
Act 250.
Yeah.
You know, people made the argument every year that Act 250 is preventing the building of new housing. I don't think that was necessarily true, but it was one of the things that was holding us back. And we had just a housing crisis, you know, not just people on the street, you know, maybe 4,000 people statewide, but young people who couldn't buy into the housing stock that we had. Too expensive. So we worked on changing Act 250, modifying Act 250 to allow some areas of the state, if you have overlapping zoning and you know, you're not going to be ruining the land because you already have protections there, then we lifted Act 250 jurisdiction in those places.
Is this form-based code, or is this
no.
related to something? Okay.
Yeah. This is just in terms of if you're going to make a certain change in the status quo, you have to get an Act 250 permit.
Yeah.
But if you're building in, you know, Brattleboro or you're building in Burlington, you already have very strict zoning laws controlling that. So that was seen as duplicative. We got rid of that, and I think that's to the good, and we're seeing more housing built more quickly.
Yeah. Anything we didn't cover that you feel you want to ring the bell on?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you guys. Just so you know, every 2 years on election night, when I finished my work at the polls, I would go sit in a restaurant and I would get a beer and get a piece of pizza, and I would wait for the results to come out. And you guys were always the first and always the ones with the most authoritative numbers.
Yeah.
So, you know, I had you dialed in every 2 years. That will continue. I'll still tune you in on election night, but, you know, that's one of a million things you do. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. We have a lot of fun. It's our big holiday. It's election night, and we can't do that without amazing volunteers.
Yeah.
Because we certainly, you know, we do a lot on a shoestring, and so we are so grateful to the folks that come in, like Jonathan, who's running the cameras here today, and grateful to staff like Kevin, who's running the board. Thank you for your time in office, and thanks for sharing a little exit interview with us. And thank you all for watching, and be well.